The midday sun struck the main street of Dry Creek like molten iron, turning dust into a golden haze that clawed at Eliza Callahan's eyes. Her skirts, torn and faded, whipped around her legs as she stumbled over splintered wooden planks. Each step sent shards of grit into her worn boots. A crowd had gathered, faces set in cruel amusement. A merchant accused her loudly of stealing a sack of flour. "I saw her, Judge," he barked. "Thief! She's taken from me again." Eliza's hands, raw and cracked, held empty pockets before the gavel of shame. I didn't," she gasped, voice trembling. Her mouth tasted of dust and despair. The crowd surged, eager for humiliation. Fingers pointed. A man spat near her boot. "You worthless," someone began, but a shadow fell across her, large and still. Judson McAllister stepped forward, boots heavy on the boardwalk, hat tipped low over a weathered face. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned her not with desire, but with something rarer, judgment tempered by curiosity. "You'll let the woman speak," he said, voice calm, but hard as stone. The crowd faltered. The merchant muttered, the wind dragging dust and spirals around them. Eliza felt a spark of relief, so small it barely warmed her chest. Judson's gaze swept the gathered townsfolk. He didn't shout or raise a fist. His presence alone demanded order. Without another word, he turned to her. "You'll work for me," he said. "Short, clipped. Not charity. Work. Can you do that?" Eliza swallowed hard, throat dry. Her pride roared like a caged horse, yet survival whispered louder. Her fingers clenched. "I'll work till my hands bleed," she promised, voice barely more than a rasp. He nodded once, imperceptibly, then motioned her toward the edge of town where his ranch sprawled, dust-choked and sunbaked. Behind him, a boy of 7 or 8 watched from the shade of a timbered porch, Tommy McAllister, wary and silent. His small fists curled at his sides, eyes measuring her as though calculating whether she could belong. The journey to the ranch was a study in both silence and revelation. The prairie stretched endlessly, pale gold fading to horizon, punctuated by jagged outcroppings of rock. Every gust of wind carried the scent of sun-baked earth and distant pine. Eliza's eyes, scanning the barren sweep, reflected a sense of loss too vast for words. "This your first time on a ranch?" Judson asked, voice flat, tone that allowed no lie. "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You'll learn fast, or you'll break." Eliza swallowed again, nodding. In her chest, a mixture of fear and determination tangled like rope. The McAllister ranch came into view, rough timber fences, cattle lowing in the heat, a barn that had seen decades of wind and rain. It was beautiful and cruel, like the world she'd stumbled into. Judson didn't speak of luxury or comfort. There was none, but something in the quiet steadiness of the place called to her, a promise she wasn't yet ready to name. She met Tommy's eyes at the edge of the corral. He didn't smile, didn't speak. But something in the tilt of his head, the wary way he held himself, made her heart tighten. She wasn't here just for herself. Judson handed her a sack of feed. "Start with the barn," he instructed. "And don't break anything you can't fix." Eliza bent down, feeling the rough fibers of the burlap against her palms, the weight unfamiliar but grounding. Dust rose around her in lazy swirls as she moved, mixing with sweat and sun. Every fiber of her being ached with exertion, but she held her promise like a talisman. Work until her hands bled. By noon, the sun had turned from gold to white-hot fury. Her shirt clung to her back, streaked with sweat and dust. She had mended fences, fed horses, and wrestled with buckets of water, each small task a battle. Judson watched from a distance, not offering praise, but allowing her to learn the rhythm of the ranch. The silence between them spoke louder than any words. Late in the afternoon, a sudden gust of wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of rain, or perhaps just teasing her hope. Eliza paused, hands on knees, breathing heavy. Tommy approached quietly, still cautious. "You don't quit easy, do you?" he asked, voice small, measuring. "No," she said simply, looking up. "Not when it matters." He considered her, then nodded, as though she had passed some invisible test. Judson, watching from the barn's edge, allowed a shadow of a smile, so faint it could have been imagined. The first night on the ranch was quiet. Eliza lay under the stars, the prairie stretching endlessly, wild and unforgiving. Her hands ached, her body ached, but her heart carried a strange warmth, hope, fragile and fierce. She thought of the words she had promised herself. "I'll work till my hands bleed." Tomorrow, she would rise again, meet the labor, face the boys' wary gaze, earn her place. But tonight, in the quiet between the wind and the distant lowing of cattle, she allowed herself the smallest sigh of relief. She was no longer alone, and somewhere, beneath the stoic exterior of the widowed rancher, a silent question hovered, almost unspoken. Can she be more than labor? Can she be family? Dawn arrived with a muted gray light, filtering through the gaps in the barn's timber walls. The McAllister ranch woke with a creak and groan. The lowing of cattle, the clatter of hooves, the distant crow of a rooster. Eliza Callahan rose before the sun fully broke, her hands already stiff and aching from yesterday's labors. She felt the rawness along her palms, the small blisters forming like markers of survival, proof that she had kept her promise. Judson McAllister was already outside, surveying the horizon with the eyes of a man who measured time by weather, by the cattle, by the wind. He glanced at her once, expression unreadable, then returned to the meticulous count of the herd. Her first task was simple, though no less exhausting: feed the horses. The morning air was cold enough to bite through her thin shirt, and the smell of hay, wet from dew, filled her nostrils. She bent over, tossing feed into the mangers, muscles trembling, heart thrumming with the knowledge that each misstep would be noticed. A misstep came quickly. One of the horses, impatient and snorting, backed into the fence, loosening a plank. The wood cracked sharply. Eliza froze. Her stomach sank. Judson's shadow fell across the fence line, wide and still. He did not scold. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he knelt, inspecting the plank, his hands steady and certain as they tightened a loose nail. "See," he said quietly, "you fix what you break. Learn fast." The simplicity of his words struck her more than any anger could have. Respect was not given, it was earned. And she had a long road ahead. Hours passed in relentless rhythm, hauling water from the distant well, mending fences, mucking out stalls. The sun climbed higher, and sweat soaked through her blouse. Dust clung to her skin like a second layer. By midday, she was exhausted, yet there was no reprieve. Judson's eyes watched from the porch, a silent reminder of expectation. Tommy appeared quietly, carrying a small bucket of water. "You're slow," he said, teasing, though his tone carried no malice. Eliza shot him a glance, lips pressed tight. "You try it," she replied, voice steady. He smiled faintly, impressed, and moved off without another word. Small victories, she realized, were often invisible to others, but not to those who mattered. By late afternoon, Judson approached, carrying a bundle of blankets. "You'll need these," he said, tossing them beside her as she rested against a fence post. "Nights are colder than you expect." Eliza's hands trembled as she folded the blankets. She caught herself staring at him, noting the angles of his face, the shadow under his hat, the quiet strength in his posture. But there was no longing yet, only recognition. Here was a man who would judge her by deeds, not words. The first week blurred into a pattern. Mistakes came, and each time, Judson corrected silently, letting her learn without humiliation. A broken fence, a spilled bucket, a stubborn horse, they were all lessons, tests, markers of endurance. And each time she met these tests, she felt a fragile sense of pride. She was becoming someone who could survive, someone who belonged. Tommy began to notice in subtler ways. He would hand her tools without being asked, save the best hay for the horse she fed, or quietly watch her from the barn doorway, curiosity softened by respect. One evening, as the last light painted the horizon in shades of crimson and gold, he spoke. "You're not like other women around here," he said quietly, voice small. Eliza's heart skipped. She knelt to his level, smiling faintly. "I don't want to be," she replied. The night brought a new challenge. A sudden storm rolling across the plains, wind tearing through the corral, rattling doors and shutters. Eliza and Judson moved quickly, securing animals and reinforcing weak posts. In the chaos, she realized her hands, though battered and bleeding, had become strong and capable, tools of survival. Judson watched her silently, a rare trace of admiration flickering in his eyes. When the storm passed, the prairie smelled of wet earth and burnt ozone. Stars glimmered coldly above, indifferent and eternal. Eliza stood beside the barn, her hair plastered to her face, clothes soaked, and felt a quiet triumph. She had faced the day, faced the labor, and endured. Small moments of kindness began to accumulate. Judson left extra food by the barn for her, silently acknowledged her careful work with a nod, or simply stood near her when danger threatened. These acts were more potent than words, carrying weight that grew with every day. She began to notice the symbolism in simple things. A sapling near the corral she had planted now stood taller, leaves brushed by wind, bending but unbroken. Its resilience mirrored hers. Each day, she grew stronger, not just in body but in spirit. By the second week, the micro-conflicts began to shape not just her labor but her sense of self. A broken plow, a misjudged fence repair, spilled water. Each mistake met with quiet correction and a chance to improve. No words of condemnation, only guidance. Respect, she realized, was being offered in the most subtle way. Trust in her ability to learn, endure, and grow. Evenings became quiet moments of reflection. She would sit near the corral, cleaning her hands, feeling the soreness deep in her muscles, and listen to the wind sweep across the plains. Occasionally, Judson would appear, silently, and share a cup of coffee with her, eyes meeting hers in a brief, meaningful glance. The unspoken understanding between them grew, a slow, steady warmth beneath the vast, indifferent sky. The emotional arc of these days was clear. Humiliation was transforming into resilience, and resilience into belonging. Her body ached, her hands bled, but she was no longer invisible. One morning, Tommy approached, a small wooden horse in hand. "For you," he said simply. "You work hard. You deserve this." Eliza's chest tightened, and she took the toy gently, seeing not just a gesture, but recognition of all she had endured. The boy, the man, the land, they were beginning to accept her. And she, for the first time, felt the stirrings of hope. By the end of this section, the foundation of trust had been laid. Eliza was earning her place on the ranch, beginning to be seen not merely as labor, but as someone who could endure, nurture, and perhaps, one day, be part of a family. The sun had barely risen when the first sign of trouble appeared. A dust cloud on the horizon, unnatural in its movement, stirred unease across the McAllister ranch. Eliza Callahan was already hauling water when she saw the shapes. 3 men, their hats low, guns glinting in the early light, riding hard toward the corral. Judson McAllister appeared at her side, calm as ever, but his jaw tightened. Tommy, clinging to the porch railing, froze, eyes wide. "They are after the land," Judson muttered, voice low. "Or maybe just to stir trouble." Eliza's heart thumped in her chest, a mixture of fear and resolve. She had come far in learning the ranch's rhythm, and now she faced the test of its survival, and of her place within it. The outsiders rode in, dust swirling around their boots, eyes greedy, mocking. "McAllister," the lead man called, voice rough. "We heard you took in a thief. Think you're better than the rest of us." Eliza stepped forward, hands trembling but determined. "I am no thief," she said, voice steady, carrying across the corral. Her words were brief but firm. Judson's hand rested lightly on the butt of his rifle. "She speaks truth," he said. "And if you're looking for trouble, you'll find it here." The tension crackled like static in the air. The outsiders laughed, though uneasily. They knew Judson was not a man to be trifled with. But the presence of Eliza, standing tall beside him, unafraid, unsettled them more than any threat of gunfire. Hours later, after the men had ridden off, the aftermath became clear. A fence post broken, a few scattered supplies, but the emotional weight lingered. Eliza felt the gaze of Tommy, quiet but assessing. She realized that courage was not measured in strength alone, but in the willingness to stand, even when fear clawed at every thought. A few days passed, and another challenge arose, this time far closer to home. A sudden storm, heavier than the first, swept across the prairie. Rain hammered the roof, wind tore at the fences, and the corral gates groaned under the force. Tommy, trying to secure a frightened horse, slipped, his small body colliding with the mud and water. "Eliza!" Judson's voice rang, sharp and desperate. Without hesitation, she sprinted through the storm, mud sucking at her boots, wind ripping her hair into her face. She reached Tommy just as he slid under a fallen plank. With all her strength, she lifted him free, rain soaking through her clothes, mud streaked across her face. "You're safe," she gasped, holding him close. He looked up at her, eyes wide, filled with relief and awe. Judson arrived moments later, silent as always, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. No words were exchanged. No praise needed. The moment itself spoke volumes. Later, as the storm passed and the prairie smelled of wet earth and ozone, Judson led them both to the barn, securing doors, calming the horses. He glanced at Eliza, a subtle shift in his gaze, a flicker of admiration, of recognition. She had proven herself not merely as labor, but as someone indispensable, courageous, capable of protecting the family he held dear. The next days were quieter, though the memory of the storm lingered. Eliza's confidence grew, mirrored in her every action. She repaired fences faster, fed the horses with steady hands, and even managed the well with a careful efficiency that impressed Judson. Tommy began to follow her around the ranch, asking questions, offering help, sharing small smiles. And then came a small, quiet moment that marked the slow burn of romance. Judson found her in the barn, tightening a loose latch on the corral gate. He handed her a pair of gloves, worn but carefully mended. "You'll need these," he said simply. Eliza accepted them, eyes meeting his briefly. There was no flourish, no declaration, only the weight of understanding, protection, respect, and a subtle intimacy that grew in shared hardship. Days passed, punctuated by minor crises, a sick calf, a broken wheel, a near fall from a ladder. But each time, Eliza proved herself, earning the trust of both man and child. The small acts of bravery and care, unnoticed by outsiders, were deeply noticed by those who mattered. One evening, she sat by the sapling she had planted weeks before. Leaves glistened from recent rain, bending but unbroken in the wind. Tommy approached quietly, watching her. "You saved me," he said softly, almost to himself. You're part of this place now." Eliza's heart tightened. She reached out, touching the small leaves of the sapling, feeling the resilience in both tree and child. "We all protect what we love," she murmured. Judson watched from the barn's doorway, hands crossed over his chest. He said nothing, yet his presence carried a quiet affirmation. The subtle, slow-burn romance between them was no longer hidden. It existed in shared glances, in acts of protection, in the silent acknowledgement of worth. As days turned to weeks, a new outsider threat emerged. Someone from her past, perhaps a figure who had wronged her, arriving to test both her resolve and the McAllister bond. Eliza faced this challenge with newfound courage. She stood beside Judson, the two of them united in a quiet, unspoken pact, family and honor above all. In a climactic confrontation, she deflected blame, took responsibility where needed, and displayed the nurturing strength that Judson had begun to recognize fully. Tommy, seeing her courage and care, called her Mama for the first time. Not aloud, but softly, the word carrying the weight of acceptance, love, and belonging. The emotional arc of this section was complete. Eliza had moved from tentative respect to full acceptance, proving herself through courage, intelligence, and care. She was no longer merely a laborer. She had become family, and the bonds of slow-burn romance and mutual respect had solidified, ready to face the next, ultimate test. The prairie lay under a cruel, relentless sun, golden and unyielding. Dust rose in wavering waves, coating fences, barns, and cattle in a dry haze. A drought had gripped the region for weeks, and the McAllister ranch felt the strain in every cracked plank, every thirsty animal, every parched patch of earth. Eliza Callahan stepped outside, hands blistered, shirt clinging to her back, and surveyed the land. It was beautiful, but it demanded endurance, demanded sacrifice, and she had promised herself she would endure. Judson McAllister joined her silently, his hat tipped low, eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll come," he said, voice rough, gravelly. "Land barons. Townsfolk who think they can take what doesn't belong to them. They'll test us." Eliza nodded. "Then we test them first." Together, they moved through the ranch, inspecting every fence, every water source, every vulnerable point. Tommy followed, carrying a bucket of water, his small presence a symbol of hope amidst hardship. The outsiders came in the late afternoon, a posse of men, greed written in every line of their sunbound faces. Their horses stomped and whinnied, dust swirling around their boots. "McAllister," the leader barked, "you think you can hold onto this land while the rest of us starve in the dust?" Judson stepped forward, rifle in hand, calm as ever. "This land survives by hard work, not threats." Eliza's pulse surged. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Her labor, her courage, her presence as part of this family would now be tested in full. She moved alongside Judson, hand steady, voice firm. "You'll have to go through me first," she said quietly, but every man heard. A tense standoff followed. Sunlight glinted off rifles, dust swirled in golden spirals, and time seemed to stretch. Then chaos erupted, horses panicked, shouting, gunfire rang out. Eliza dove to shield Tommy, pulling him to the ground as Judson returned fire, precise, measured, protecting both his son and her. In the midst of the storm, Eliza displayed every lesson she had learned. She guided the frightened cattle to safety, secured the barn doors, and moved with agility and purpose. Her hands, raw and bleeding, became instruments of protection rather than labor. She acted with courage, decisiveness, and fierce maternal instinct. The confrontation ended with the outsiders retreating, defeated not merely by force, but by the unyielding unity of the McAllisters. Dust settled, silence returned, broken only by the panting of horses and the low murmurs of relief. Judson approached Eliza, his hat pulled back now, face streaked with dust and sweat. His gaze softened, admiration shining through the stoic exterior. He reached out, brushing a streak of mud from her cheek. You can be the heart of this place," he said quietly, voice heavy with meaning. "Of my son, and of me." Eliza's breath caught. No words of romance were spoken, yet the weight of his acknowledgement filled the space between them. It was an intimacy forged in shared danger, in labor, in mutual respect and care. The prairie around them seemed to exhale. The storm of conflict had passed. The ranch, battered but unbroken, stood as a testament to their endurance. Tommy, finally brave enough, ran to Eliza and threw his small arms around her waist. "Mama," he whispered. Eliza lifted him gently, holding him close. The moment was simple, yet monumental, a quiet victory that encompassed love, family, and belonging. The following weeks brought recovery and renewal. Eliza and Judson worked side by side, repairing fences, tending crops, and guiding the herd. The sapling she had planted weeks before now stood firm, leaves brushing against the wind, resilient against sun and storm alike. It had become a living symbol of their journey, growth from struggle, hope from adversity. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in crimson and gold, the family gathered by the barn. Eliza, hands still calloused and marked by work, held Tommy's hand. Judson stood close, protective and steady. Their eyes met briefly, communicating a shared understanding. Hardship had forged bonds deeper than words could describe. A final symbolic image sealed their legacy. Eliza, standing tall beside the sapling, Tommy at her side, Judson's hand resting gently on her shoulder, all three facing the endless prairie together. The land around them was still wild, still untamed, yet in this moment, it was theirs, not merely by ownership, but by endurance, love, and unyielding determination. The emotional arc concluded. Humiliation had transformed into resilience, resilience into belonging, belonging into redemption, and redemption into legacy. Love had been earned slowly, through trials and shared hardships, culminating in a powerful affirmation of family, survival, and human courage. As night fell, stars emerging in the clear prairie sky, Eliza gazed upward. She thought of the long, dusty road she had traveled, the hardship she had faced, and the family she had come to protect and cherish. She smiled faintly, hands still rough, heart full. Somewhere beneath the quiet strength of the widowed rancher, Judson's gaze met hers once more. No words were necessary. In that glance, there was respect, love, and the promise of all the days yet to come. The McAllister ranch, like its inhabitants, had endured. And in the endless sweep of the Wild West, amidst dust, wind, and sun, their story would remain, etched not in words, but in courage, in loyalty, and in the lasting echo of hearts that had learned to love, protect, and belong.